Alright, so anyways, today what we're going to do is just use some of this scrap and jack around with some of this stuff. More than likely I'm going to probably just make a water pipe out of a couple of these pieces. We'll see what we can do with them. Some of them are pretty messed up. So, but anyways, you know, it gives you something to do, a little bit of stuff to practice, getting your technique down. And in my case, you know, it's been quite a few years since I really sat down and messed with this stuff. So getting it set back up and everything is kind of a process. At this point, you know, I had sold a bunch of stuff, and anyways, I've got the old torch here. This is a Bethlehem Model B bench torch. Inner and outer ring adjustability, but no dual hose adjustability. Also, no regular air adjustment, because it doesn't take regular air at all. Some of the newer ones do, but that's alright. And the valves actually are a little worn out on this thing, but otherwise, you know, once you get it adjusted and everything, it seems to work pretty good. You know, it's fingered out a little bit and stuff like that, but it's just one of those things, man. You gotta deal with what you got. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Let me get this thing fired up. There we go. Maybe that'll help. I'm shaking so damn much here. Got a little dichromium lens that I'm putting over the camera so you can kind of see a little bit better, because it's a little tough to see what's going on if you don't have any kind of shield over that camera lens. So anyways, sorry about the excess junk on the sides and all that stuff, but anyways, I'm sure you'll be able to see just fine. Okay, let's see what we got here. Normally this would be so bright you wouldn't even be able to look at it, and you'd probably have cataracts by the time you were 50. That's 10 years for me. Now, like I said, this is feathered out a teeny bit, just being such an old torch and everything, but it's got to be water cooled. It gets extremely hot. So anyways, let's just go ahead and get this adjusted up. I'm going to go ahead and make some connector tubes, you know, fix some of these ends on these things, maybe get a couple things ready so that I'm able to go ahead and connect it to something else. In any case, you would normally want to do this real slowly, but it's already broken and stuff on the end, so I'm just going to go ahead and just slide it right down there to the super hot part of the flame, and I'm going to let this thing shrink down. At this point, I'm going to just hold my finger over the end. I'm not going to use any kind of stopper or plug or anything to keep the air from running inside that tube. We're just going to go ahead and shrink this down, get a nice little build up here on the end, and then I'm going to take that excess and I'm just going to pull it right off. You want to try to keep that stuff as centered as possible. It makes your life much easier when you're trying to get everything straight, especially for connections. You know, blowing bubbles or anything like that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and blow this out. I'm going to go ahead and blow this out because I want it to be as straight as possible, like we said. So I'm going to just make that sidewall pretty thin. Okay. Okay, there's my bubble, and that actually breaks fairly easy. And I've got a little shit bucket down here that I just break it in, because you don't really want to be breathing any of that junk, so it's a good idea to do it in something at least tall enough to where you're not getting any of that junk that's that's really, really thin. So we're going to go ahead and melt this back down, shrink it. We're going to do this with a couple of these real quick, just so we can get some stuff ready for messing around with some of the scrap. This is the 13 millimeter to 15 millimeter tube, 2 millimeter wall. It is soft glass. This is German borosilicate. Okay, so we've got a pretty tight little end here, and we're going to go ahead and set that down. And grab a couple of more pieces here. This one should work fairly well. Notice how that cracked because I just stuck it right down in the heat super quickly. Now bigger glass, thicker glass, heavier stuff breaks really easy, so you got to be careful. You got to make sure you're coming way out of here, and then just until that thing can get warm enough to where you're not going to start cracking stuff. Now what I've got behind me here is a little crock pot filled with vermiculite, because I do not have a kiln at this point. It's sold. So in any case, like I said, you make do with what you have. Vermiculite is an excellent insulator, and if you get that crock pot fired up, you can stick pieces in there and just leave them sit for a long time for a slower cool down period than just if you were to just shove that into a bucket with vermiculite and all that good stuff and just let it cool down normally. That heat, will also kind of cure the glass a little bit, because it is a very brittle substance. The molecules seem to adhere better if you actually manipulate those molecules slowly over time. If you try to do things too quickly, the items or the glass rod or tube or whatever you're using tends to break a lot more easily. And that one we got jacked up because we got a little piece on there. Now you can actually take a piece of tubing and remove excess glass from stuff just by rolling that over that area of glass where it's got too much buildup. In this case, I'm going to pull that out very quickly to try to get just a very thin little end on this. Once again, we're going to go ahead and blow this one out also, but I'm going to remove any excess buildup, that little nub, the little nipple on the end. I'm going to pull it out one more time, make sure we got this as fairly centered as possible. I didn't do it. There we go. Anyways, you always kind of want to turn these things, for those of you who haven't really messed with this much, just doing beads or anything else like that. This is very similar. You got to keep that stuff moving, otherwise it's going to sag on you. Oops. That's what I'm talking about there. You don't want that stuff, you don't want to be able to breathe that stuff in, and in any case, that's why I have the excellent ventilation source in here, so it can suck any of that junk out that gets in the air. And that was something I would suggest for you to do in all situations, providing anyway that you would want to have adequate ventilation for any flame usage, any lamp lighting techniques at all, whether it's welding, glass blowing, just flat out soldering, or anything you use a torch for. You don't want to fall asleep doing this. Burns are fairly easy to get doing this stuff. Now that's a little bit off center, but we're going to go ahead and use it because there is, there's quite a bit of things you can do just with the, scrap glass that you've got. Once again, I'm just putting it right into the heat because these ends are already messed up, and you notice that one just broke off right away. Now you can also crank this up and use this, but I try not to use too much oxygen. It can get very expensive to continuously exchange and pay for fills or rentals on bottles and stuff like that. So you want to try to get as little oxygen usage as possible when you really don't need it. Right now we don't need it. We just need to make sure that that end gets melted down, and so we can try to get a clean center on this. I noticed there was a little bit of cracks in this glass, so I'm taking it back just a little bit farther, and during the process I'm just pulling out that excess. You also want to use some type of a shielding on your work surface. Stainless steel usually works the best. This is just a piece of the desk that works fairly well. Just go ahead and continue to do that with whatever pieces that you got left sitting there, things that you can use for attaching to other mess ups or anything like that, and just shrink them down and then have them ready. Typically you want to try to use that sharp end, the actual broken off end, like on this particular piece. That's just the sharp end. Get a good break, and you want to use that typically to make connections, just because you won't have any excess bubbles or anything like that during the process of connection then. Anyway, so we've shrunk these down to an extent, and actually I just resurfaced some graphite padding. I use this for shaping and some other things. It would have been nice to still have my old shaping anvil and some stuff like that, but this works fairly good. You can resurface these. I've got one side that's actually if you'll notice, a pretty screwed up surface, but it used to be a striped surface. Now you can actually add some neat little things to whatever you're working with in glass. You can add texture to it, depending on how you're using it. So sometimes it's good to just resurface that with two different textures in mind, one on each side. Okay, now we've got a couple of these all built and everything, and you notice that if you can see that the ends of those are just kind of basically just sticking right off the end of that little piece of metal. And that's fine, because typically you can get your hands fairly close to the end. Glass is not a very good conductor of heat, so in this case, like I said, just be careful, but just stay right on the end of the table. Even if it's wood, you do want to try to use a wood that does not catch on fire easily. It takes a little bit. So if anything does drop, that it's going to smolder on that surface, but it'll something that you can at least try to pick up before it gets embedded down in there or anything. But now, most of the time you would want to probably just put a little stopper up here in the end. That just keeps anything, well, for one, it keeps your hands from getting burnt from anything accidentally, you accidentally turning it wrong and it blowing super hot gas and flame right up the middle of that rod. It doesn't feel too good. And actually, as a matter of fact, I grabbed a very hot rod the other day that I didn't realize had the flame go down the middle, and boy, yeah, it'll mess you up. You'll definitely not be blowing any glass for a couple of days because your hand hurts too damn bad. But I guess it's par for the course when you're working with anything that's dangerous, and it's not really dangerous as long as you pay attention, you stay sober, and take your time. Once again, I blew it. blowing a little too hard. You want to be careful about doing that, especially if you're doing this in your house, because you don't want anybody else breathing that stuff, and that can cause you some major problems later in life. It's similar to mesothelioma, you know, any kind of asbestos type related lung diseases and stuff. These silica, you'll notice on pretty much every bag of concrete that has silica in it, there's fairly large warnings to say do not breathe the silica dust, sand, anything, because it will cause you problems. So, you know, you may want to wear a mask during this. My lungs are pretty shot as it is, so you know, I've opted out of wearing masks if you're going to be doing stuff that allows you to have particle matter from glass floating in the air. So in any case, just be careful of that stuff. Alright, those are fairly decent. I didn't take a whole lot of time with that, but something that you can spend a lot of time on, and actually the more time you spend on it, typically the better your turnouts are going to be. Now, both of these ends are actually already broken off. I've picked the worst end to actually be the side that I would normally blow out of or in. And now this is a little bit bigger piece of glass. I'm going to actually start out here at the end to try to keep any stuff from actually cracking, breaking, splitting before I actually melt that down so it's not sharp. Now you're going to want to do that with your blow tubes unless you're very careful as you put your mouth over the end. Sometimes you have to do it quickly, so it's better to just go ahead and melt that sharp edge down, and so you don't jack yourself up. Do remember, because I've done it before, once you've melted that end down, it stays hot for quite a bit. So you want to set that aside so that you don't accidentally use it, grab it, and then blow in it during the process of using it for something else. So we're going to go ahead and just set it over here. Alright, now I've got a few blow tubes that I've just made and stuff. You know, I can use those for connections or whatever at this point. I do want to grab a couple of 3/8 pieces, or I believe 11 millimeter. I think they end up being. Let's see. I'll just go ahead and grab a new stick. Now, you do want to kind of clean this off. Any junk that may have gotten on it while it's been sitting there, and a lot of times it's good to just cover that stuff up so that if there is dust in the air and stuff, it doesn't really get on the glass, because the cleaner the surface of the glass is, the cleaner the inside of the glass is, the better luck you're going to have with without having imperfections in your piece that you're working on, and especially during connection times with those pieces of glass. Any kind of junk on there can cause you to have a weak point and possibly break on you. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do this. I mean, I have a diamond Dremel bit that I use actually to cut into glass and to make nicks and stuff, but a regular file can work fairly good as long as it's got a nice rough edge on there. So we're going to go ahead and do these off in about 2-foot lengths without measuring. And we're just going to make a little nick there. You want to put a little bit of water or spit is what I always use, and just when you snap that off, you want to use equal pressure and equal distance from where your thumbs are from that place where you break it, because it can actually snap off in a few pieces if you don't. Also, it'll give you a little bit cleaner break if you do that. Now you can always just take that in and then just tap it on something or grab another piece of glass and just kind of nick that little teeny piece that usually sticks out when you break it, if you don't get a completely perfect break. Looks like these all broke fairly decently. Now there is other ways to break these pieces of glass, and hot pokers, cold glass work fairly well. But in any case, we're just going to go ahead and set these down and just take the one in the middle that doesn't have the melted down end and melt an end on it real quickly. Alright, now that's all we're going to do, because we want to just want to take it down. We don't want to actually shrink it too much. So anyways, we've got the broken end here, so we're going to go ahead and set that hot end out. Alright, now, I'm going to go ahead and take some of this stuff, it's probably cooled down at this point, and dump it in the shit bucket. So try to grab the ends that are the thinnest, because they've already cooled down and they're not going to burn the shit out of you when you try to grab them. So anyways, once again, you just got to pay attention to what you're doing and be careful and give the stuff time to cool, you know, because it's freaking really hot, depending. Alright, now, with any kind of connections or using old, you know, other glass, you know, a lot of times there's junk on it, so it's probably not going to be something you want to sell to anybody or you know, use for any kind of scientific measures of any kind, you know, projects, experiments, anything like that, because typically you've already got junk in there and melting it down and everything, and oh heck, you know, it's been sitting there, so you got to be real careful what you're using that stuff for. But we've got a couple of things here that I noticed that I could probably use to make some connections and also to, you know, maybe blow some bubbles out. But today I think what I'm going to do is use actually this piece of glass right here. This is actually I believe a 2-inch round that had the bubble was a little thin, and I just went ahead and broke it off. I had already made a connection here, but we're not going to use that connection. We're actually going to use a little smaller connection, and this is a fairly difficult process with these bigger pieces of glass. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this down for a second. So what I'm going to do is actually try to break these edges off a little bit better. It'll make it a little bit easier to shrink this down and get it straight, because we're going to make a new connection on both ends basically here. We're going to give ourselves some handles. And now without rollers, the longer you get, it does make it a little more difficult, but in this case, because we are going to be using 1/2-inch glass for one of our connections, and the possibility of, let's see here what we got. Yeah, let's see what I have left. Actually, that should work fairly well right there. And we actually have a pretty junky end here, so we want to go ahead and fix this now. Go ahead and shrink this down and do just like we did with the 1/2-inch. You know, finding your mixture of oxygen to propane is sometimes a hassle depending on your torch. Now, the newer torches are fairly easy to use, and of course their valves are brand new, but in the case of this one, it can be tedious to try to get that right amount of heat versus spread. And once again, I'm utilizing the least amount of oxygen during this process so that we can kind of conserve as much as possible for just doing piddly stuff, because we may really need that for some of this thicker stuff, and sometimes you really got to crank it up, so that can eat through your oxygen pretty quickly. Alright, now I'm going to sit there and keep spinning that to try to keep that centered. This thicker stuff, this is something that you want to do pay attention to. Now, I always spin it as I'm pulling that out. It keeps that place where you're actually going to shrink that down right in the center, if you'll notice. And once again here, we're going to have a, let's see, try to keep that on the metal surface. Once again here, we're going to try to keep as little excess as possible on this, so we're just going to let it get real hot, and then we're going to grab that and just pull it out. We're going to do that a couple times till we can kind of get this right down to the nub, almost without a nipple at this point. Notice I pulled that out fairly quickly. What that does is thins it out. I think I said that earlier actually, so that's something you can kind of mess with. Alright, now this one, you know, this nipple's a little bit off on this, so I'm going to go ahead and melt this down. Try to get a little bit more of a build up. And a little bit cleaner nipple here. That's so thin right there. It's typically thinner than paper, as you can hear as I put that in my bucket here. Now what I used is for a bucket, which you know you can use all kinds of different stuff. But what I use for a bucket is actually an old stainless steel cooking pan that I found actually driving down the alley one day. One man's trash is another man's treasure, and it works out just great for me. It's a very, very resilient metal for super high heat, and also it keeps any junk that you may be using, like coffee cans. I typically try not to use tin. I see a lot of people using coffee can, but that tin actually has a poisonous gas that is produced at super high heats, and sometimes when you drop your junk ends and stuff in there, it's going to create that burning that causes that gas that you really don't want to jack with. And so anyways, once again, it's just something that you kind of got to pay attention to. Anything you're doing that causes you to have to breathe stuff in is something you want to be cautious about. So go ahead and shrink this down also, just like the others. Now this is going to have a little thicker buildup on the end than I would typically want for a thinner glass style connection, and this also can cause you problems too in getting stuff straight and looking pretty during your connection process. So it's not something that you necessarily want to do in a aspect where you're going to be selling that stuff, or it has to be just extremely beautiful when it's finished, because you'll notice it's kind of a little bit off. Alright, so that's pretty much all done. We got a couple different sizes of tubing ready to go, and a couple of them have cooled enough to where we can probably go ahead and just melt these down. In this case, once again, this is going to be some thick stuff, and it's probably going to crack. I'm hoping it's not, but I don't want to take the time to go through the process of getting it completely ready, which would what you would do is start out very far, wave it in front, spin it in front, however you want to do it, to get that area heated up.